Good morning. Welcome to day 2 of MACRI's 2022 Symposium, the last day of our 2-day annual event to highlight the past, present, and future of Mexican American civil rights. We want to thank all of our sponsors for supporting this event, especially AARP Texas, Democratizing Racial Justice at UTSA, Bexar County, the City of San Antonio, and the San Antonio Department of Arts and Culture, the Mexican American Bar Association of San Antonio, the Herrera Law Firm, the Mellon Foundation, and the Guadalupe Cultural Arts Center are hosts for this symposium. We are coming to you live from the Historic Guadalupe Theater on the west side of San Antonio, the heart of Mexican American San Antonio, and the Mexican American cultural capital of the United States. We're so pleased to be here in the West Side, where so much Mexican American civil rights history was born and proliferated across the country. And today, for the last day of our annual symposium, we have some fantastic speakers. We'll be talking about, of course, something that I think is on many of our minds right now, voting rights. We'll also be talking about an issue that's been at the center of civil rights efforts for generations, education. And we'll also be talking about the importance of representation, meaning where do we see Mexican Americans, where do we see Latinos out in the public, in the media, in the news, and on our screens, big and small. So we have a lot to discuss today. And before we kick off, I just want to say to all of our virtual viewers, thank you for tuning in from wherever you are. Virtual viewers have really been the backbone of MACRI over the last 3 years. We're a very young organization, only 3 years old, and when we started, all of our programs were online due to the pandemic, and our online audience has grown so much. We have had over 50,000 viewers of our programs over the last few years, which is really amazing. About 48% of those viewers are from the San Antonio area, and 52% are from other parts of the country. So we've been so glad to be able to connect with an audience across the country and share information about Mexican American civil rights history. It's our mission to expand the nation's understanding of civil rights in the United States. And so we thank you for being part of this journey with us. For those of you in San Antonio at the theater watching with us today, I just want to remind you that until 4 o'clock today, the bookstore is open across the street. They carry books about Latinos by Latinos. It's the only bookstore in the West Side, and it's the Guadalupe Latino bookstore, so they carry a lot of authors that we want to support. So if you have a moment, maybe during our lunch break, please go and visit the bookstore or whenever is convenient for you. And without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our first speaker, Norma Cantu. Let me tell you a little bit about her. Norma Cantu is an American civil rights lawyer and educator. She's a professor of law and education at the University of Texas at Austin. In 2021, she was appointed chair of the United States Commission on Civil Rights, becoming the first Latina to hold this position. She previously served as the Assistant Secretary of Education for the Office of Civil Rights under President Bill Clinton, and as a regional counsel for the Mexican American Legal Defense and Educational Fund. A native of Brownsville, Texas, she received her bachelor's degree, graduating summa cum laude from the University of Texas Pan American, and graduated from Harvard Law School. I'd like to introduce Norma Cantu.
Thank you. Buenos dias. All right, okay. So I brought notes because I will run over time if I don't, and I'm putting on my glasses. You all are used to seeing me without them. Well, now I'm finally giving in to my age. I chose a simple title for today's plática. Simply, Movimiento. In fact, I was asked, is that it? That's it? That's the whole title? You know, of course that's the whole title. There are numerous words in Spanish for movimiento, and it's not just a social movement. It's a synonym for desplazamiento, which is the shifting or movement or travel. Ajetreo is a synonym too for movimiento because it translates as hustle and bustle, or agitation in English. In music, the word means a tempo or a movement as part of a symphony. And in business lingo, a movimiento of capital is cash flow. So now that I've had fun with words, I'm going to hustle and cover 3 main points. First, I'm going to remind everyone how slow the movimientos normally appear when looking at our country's highest court, the U.S. Supreme Court. Secondly, I'll talk briefly about how the court rulings by themselves have little meaning unless the communities are organized to implement the constitutional meanings. And finally, I will close with good news about how far the Latinx, Hispanic, Mexican-American communities have progressed. Okay, so starting first in the world of law and education. And by the way, I'm not your voting rights presenter. I did work at Malta for 14 years, which is like staying at the Omni Hotel. It means you think you know everybody and you know everything. But the only voting right case that I actually worked on was the first Texas voting rights case. No, I'm not that old. I wasn't there in 1972. But we were collecting attorney's fees. And my job was to ensure that on appeal, the judge's full award be granted. Did you know that Maldiv got a multiplier of double attorney fees? And so I was carrying on my big shoulders half of the whole thing because I was arguing that multiplier that doubled the fees. Well, because all the guys gave me only 3 minutes, I decided I will be sneaky and I will draft a chart and put a chart in front of the Fifth Court of Appeals. And the chart listed all of the appellate cases that were bigger than double. 9 times the fees, 8 times the fees, 5 times the fees. By the time you got to double, double looks really reasonable. And so Maldiv collected double the fees from the state of Texas. Gracias to the state of Texas for being a major donor to the Mexican-American Legal Defense Fund. So on education, it's not a coincidence that things move slowly, because if you go to the U.S. Supreme Court building, you will see on the walls and on the lamps drawings and images of turtles. The designers of the architecture incorporated turtles to reflect how slow and deliberate the judges will work and how slow and deliberate the judicial system appears to us. And that accurately captures the pace of legal decisions affecting Latinos in education. This year marks the 40th anniversary of the Supreme Court decision in Plyler versus Doe. Filed in 1977, the decision in 1982 affirmed the ruling by Justice William Wayne Justice in favor of the Texas school children in Tyler, Texas. The 5 years of waiting for the ruling was followed by years of enforcement of the ruling to be sure that Texas and Texas schools followed the court's orders and to secure full compliance. For one example, the state of Texas tried to replace the policy that had been struck down with a new policy requiring all Texas children to provide the schools their Social Security numbers, knowing full well that the children had not been issued Social Security numbers and that they would not be able to complete the process anytime quickly. As a settlement, the state of Texas agreed to issue their own codes so the kids' names could be added to the enrollments. Individual districts continued to ask for immigration documents despite the ruling. And when the students reached the 12th grade and applied to college with their Texas high school diplomas, and they applied to Texas colleges, some of the colleges refused to enroll students. With the leadership of the Texas legislature, especially the late and great Irma Rangel, the state adopted a reciprocity statute, a standard that allowed for in-state tuition for students in Texas, as well as any jurisdiction that shared a border with the state of Texas. It did not mention immigration. It did not mention Mexican American. It was a geographic statute. For those other states, prospective students needed to live in Texas for at least 1 year. But recently, a conservative group challenged this statute that has been in place for not the full 40 years, but it was the first one adopted in the country. So for a couple of decades, we've had this standard. Recently, a group challenged it and asked that all the states be allowed to have their students apply for in-state tuition, and that there not be any kind of out-of-state charges at all. Their basis was that it violated students from out of state, their equal protection, and that it was unfair that immigrant kids in Texas were treated better than U.S. citizen kids outside of Texas. So this was an indirect threat, but a real threat to the rights of our DACA students. And as we all know, and the courts have said, Congress has a role to play with regards to DACA. The federal government has a role to play, but here are individual students who are challenging the rights of students who have lived in Texas, have graduated from Texas, and are applying in Texas. Well, a federal district judge ruled for the conservative group. I was very surprised by that. And the case is on appeal right now to the Fifth Circuit. So the struggle continues. The challenges remain, but we will not go back. We will not accept a ruling that devastates the lives of kids who were here for most of their lives, who have high school credentials, and who are being told you're giving some kind of preference, or you're given some kind of favorable treatment. This is a geographic statute, so we will not give this one up. The advantage of what happened with the Plyler case is one that I personally got to see first. I mean, I got to see it firsthand. In 1982, see, I am that old. In 1982, I was a baby lawyer, which we now call a junior attorney. I was a baby lawyer working in MALDEF, and in those days, we didn't have the technology to have automatic transcripts of depositions and trial transcripts. So my job was to attend 2 trials that were happening on the same weeks. So for several weeks, I would drive between Houston and Tyler, Texas, and attend both trials and summarize the cases and share them with both sets of attorneys who were representing DACA kids, or kids back then who were undocumented kids. In the Houston case, the lawyers were using the argument of immigration law, that states should not take over the federal role, and that the states should not be enforcing immigration law. In the Plyler case, and by the way, Plyler is the superintendent of the school district in Tyler, so really it's Plyler from Tyler. So in the Plyler case, the argument was educational, that the Texas Constitution put Texas at the very front, that these kids were innocent children and were being punished for something the children themselves, they were brought over as infants. So they were being punished with the loss of complete access to education. In the Plyler case, you could have a child who came over as a 6-month-old and a younger brother born a year later, and the younger brother could attend public school with no charges, but the sister a year older could be charged out-of-state tuition, and the families could not afford that. The reasons the family could not afford that is they came for jobs, not for school. The families came to work as agricultural workers, and those of you online will look at me and say, well, what's the agriculture in Tyler, Texas? And some of you know. Some of you know. The long stem Tyler roses. What you give your loved one, you know, when you're engaged, what you take to your mom on Mother's Day. The parents literally worked in the thorns, taking a job that no other Texans wanted. And these children were the children of the thorns. When the decision came down from the Supreme Court that the parents who were agricultural workers had beat the entire state of Texas, and the U.S. Supreme Court had ruled in their favor, the local attorney on that case called me and said, I wish you were in Tyler to see what I'm looking at. And I said, what are you looking at, Larry? And Larry Daves was looking at an office that had been filled with that gesture of love. The long stem, red Tyler roses were everywhere. He said, I didn't think I'd ever say this word, but I wish you could smell my office. And so the story is a human story, and it was based on strong legal precedent. There had already been Supreme Court cases that you don't punish children for parents' decisions, and that precedent had to do with wills and estates, where the states had written overbroad rules and didn't make the rules individually applicable. But in these overbroad rules, the states were saying, if your mom and dad didn't get married, you're illegitimate and you cannot inherit. Even though you are a good son or a good daughter, you're going to be punished for something your mom and dad did. And they never did an individual review of any of those kids. And the U.S. Supreme Court relied on those cases dealing with illegitimacy. It sounds embarrassing that those are the cases they had to rely upon, because it's just common sense that when you have students who have met all the eligibility to go to school and they are physically residents of Texas, have done their year in Texas, much longer than a year for some of the kids. So we will not go back on Plyler. Secondly, I'm going to talk about, because I was asked, there are maybe some young viewers, not as old as I, who want to know, how did you get a job working for the U.S. Department of Education? How did you get to be on the transition team for President Biden? And why are you an appointee today? Okay. So I'm going to give as short an explanation as I can of the career pathway, because no one explained it to me. When I was trying to figure it out, there was no one there who said, let me talk to you about it and let me take questions. So what I learned was that you really have to choose what area of work that interests you, and then you need to figure out, what kind of career fits that area of work, and can I live on it? Can I raise a family on it? So for me, it was a very easy pathway, because even in the 4th and 5th grade, I already knew I wanted to work in a courthouse. I would walk home in Brownsville, Texas, where the temperature is 100 and the humidity is 100. And on my short walk home, I would always cut into the courthouse because it was air conditioned, because people dressed nicely in suits, and because the water fountain had ice cold water. And I could take a beautiful water break before I would finish my walk home. I loved libraries. One of the first things my parents got me was a library card. So whatever interested me, I went and read books about it. And what was an evil thing turned out to be a good. It was wrong and unfortunate that we did not have a city public library, that the city could not afford one, and they prioritized other goods that they needed. They needed hospitals, they needed police, they needed a fire department, they needed all those things. And the money just ran out, and they could not afford a public library. What turned out to be a blessing was the community college agreed to make their library open to people of all ages. So as a 3rd grader, I got a library card to college. And the librarians saw that I was finishing the children's books, and they encouraged me to just keep reading, and I moved on into the adult books right away. Boy, did I like those medical books. Really pretty pictures. I fought for schools and colleges to be of high quality, because I had an opportunity to go to law school. And I was able to compare the quality of the libraries at UT Pan Am to the libraries at a private law school. UT Pan Am was also running out of money. That seems to be a pattern with me. It could not afford staff to keep the libraries open on weekends, so at 5 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, the library would be closed until Monday morning. So imagine you're a college student. Well, you don't have to imagine. A lot of us went through it, really. We were college students who were shut out of the libraries for 3.5 days, 2.5 days of the week. In contrast, the private law school had 3 complete libraries open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That motivated me to work with Al Kaufman, to work with MALDEF, to fight for funding for high-quality colleges and for public ed. I never assumed that I wouldn't find a friend to help me on anything I wanted to do. I never assumed, I never believed that God would let me be alone and would not put someone in my path, would not put someone where I could reach out to them and ask for help. I'm told in the Latino culture, my mom never used the word because She doesn't cuss, but she does, and it's not really a cuss word, but she said, don't use the word pediche, Norma, so I use the word pediche all the time. It means somebody who is like really nagging about something that they have to have. And the idea is that your culture makes you strong, but you're even stronger if you ask for help. And so I asked for help. And I got letters from my faculty members, and I got support from classmates who were better prepared for law school than I was, and I finished on time. Now, time is an important theme for me, and I'm watching my clock. I'm going to end it really quickly. Everyone has the same amount of time. What matters is how you use it. Because I was the oldest of 6, I rushed through school and skipped grades. Because I knew that college was expensive, I rushed through college. So I finished college 1 month after my 19th birthday and became a high school teacher. I raised money for law school that way. I am telling you that the being conscious of time is just built into me. I'm wired that way. But we can all balance our life off. I balanced the schedule today so I'd have time with you all. Finally, I'm always remembering to be grateful, and I'm telling you folks 3 ways to get a White House position. And I'm not here representing the White House. I'm not here representing the federal government. I'm representing my career path that made it possible for it to happen to me, and it can happen for you. The first is you can get involved in getting out the vote. If you get out the votes, you will be noticed. That goes in your application, that goes in the letters that you all send in to get a White House appointment. The second is you can help with development and fundraising. You have contacts and you know people, you will get noticed. The third way, the most common way, 97%, 98% are coming in this way because you know an area of social science, or you know an area of technology, or you know an area of history. Whatever your topic is, you are the go-to person. You are the one that they want in the room because they're going to have to talk to you anyway. And that is a pathway that is open to 100% of us as Latinos and Latinas. So speak up. Ask for what you want, porque la que no habla, ni Dios la oye. She who does not speak, even God will not listen. I'll close by telling you, we have made so much progress going back to what it was like in the last couple of decades. Our census is better. We have a better count. We have more information more readily, easily to share as we're doing today with MACRI and online. We continue to use our networks and ask each other, are you interested in working on this with me? And we have the highest level I have ever seen in decades of young people, that next generation, who are very motivated and very eager to be part of civil rights. So I'm going to just close, 1 minute left, so I'm going to give you homework. I used to teach 8th graders, remember I told you I was a high school teacher. The civil rights enforcement can lead to higher quality education for all and make us better workers. Think economy, think pushing what will pay better. That's one topic. If you don't have a topic chosen yet as a young person, how giving us more higher education opportunities will lead to a better economy. It will make us more competitive globally. That's another topic that you could pick. Human rights protections disrupt the school-to-prison pipeline. There will be fewer Latinx folk in prisons when our schools get better, and that saves money for the whole country. Human rights means everyone is counted in every census every single time, and that saves money when we plan with good data for everyone. And civil rights means that our first responders will be part of a diverse and inclusive workforce, and that Latinos help police with recruitment and retention because they will keep us safe and we will cooperate. People think Latinos don't think about law enforcement. We are the law enforcement. During COVID, one of my cousins died of COVID. He was with the sheriff's office. I lost a member of my family, and I can continue to keep speaking up in favor of we need to be represented and we need to be part of those folk who keep us safe. So human rights means whatever it means to you personally, and if you are the go-to person on that, then you'll be me. You'll be in the White House, and you'll be at the table where it matters. To close, Robert Shaw said, quote, "Make the most of your yard of space and your inch of time." It's the same everyone has. Thank you very much.
While we get our next speakers up on the stage, we have a short message from the Mayor of San Antonio, Ron Nierenberg.
Hi, I'm Mayor Ron Nierenberg. On behalf of the City of San Antonio, welcome to the Mexican American Civil Rights Institute's 2022 Symposium. Get ready to enjoy 2 days of thought-provoking presentations with more than 24 speakers. San Antonio is at the heart of the Mexican American civil rights history, and we are proud to be the home of the Mexican American Civil Rights Institute. In fact, San Antonio is undoubtedly the appropriate home for the Institute. San Antonio is the birthplace of many important organizations that have been leaders in the cause of civil rights. The Mexican American Unity Council, MALDEF, Communities Organized for Public Service, Southwest Voter Registration Education Project are among those impressive groups. And as you know, the struggle continues. In fact, our voting rights again are under attack today. Having the Institute here to display and highlight the important developments and players in the movement is crucial for us and future generations to understand where we have been. Economic discrimination and institutional racism are at the roots of the social conditions that our city has struggled to overcome, and the Mexican American civil rights movement has been essential in bringing progress. I'm proud to note that the City Council recently approved the 6th consecutive budget that uses an equity framework to improve infrastructure and other services in historically underserved neighborhoods. This type of work remains essential, and San Antonio is proud to push for social justice. We are all in this together. Thank you for your participation.
Well, good morning, good morning. Thank you, Ms. Cantu, for the presentation this morning. What a way to kick off our morning. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning, and I look forward to important discussions throughout the afternoon taking place right here at the Historic Guadalupe Theater. But first, before we begin our discussion, I want to take this opportunity to say thank you. Mil gracias to Dr. Sarah Gould. You're doing a tremendous job for MACRI, and appreciate your leadership, your hard work in preserving our cultura, sharing the legacies we can all learn from, and bringing us together. Thank you, Sarah. Movements in solidarity. Our focal point for this morning's panel is organizing in solidarity in full Si Se Puede spirit for our Black and brown community. First, we will visit a historic event that brought opposite sides of our city together, the East Side and the West Side. The year was 1986. Let Freedom Ring, a celebration for Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Second, we'll then hear from TC on his experiences organizing with fellow brothers and sisters for social justice and community victories. But we will also address concerns and challenges facing our Black and brown community. Lastly, we will share our calls to action. Both TC and I, when we met last week, we both agree that it is wonderful to get together and open up these discussions, but it's also important for us to go out and engage in our communities so we can advance the agenda for all those issues that are most important to all of us here today. So with that, we'll go right into this, and the AV team, if you can go ahead and roll the tape, please.
It started with a woman who had the courage to stand up for dignity, justice, and human rights in America, and with a man who believed that all people are created equal in the eyes of God. The IUE District 11 Social Actions Department proudly dedicates this film for all generations to come, to continue the visions and goals of Dr. Martin Luther King, who gave his life in the name of justice.
We'll be participating in this historic event for the for the city-county memorial celebration in honor of Dr. King. We're honored to march with you in honor of Dr. King here today.
Thank you, Brother Martinez. I would just like to say that this is one of the aspects of Dr. Martin Luther King, our dreams becoming a reality. Certainly, Dr. King was interested in the decency of labor for all people, a fair wage for all people, decency for mankind as reflected in labor. Dr. King fought hard for free labor, for equalization, freedom of all men in the labor movement. And today, he need not be here. He's already been here. He saw this coming. For he know God is on the throne, and this is what God likes for men to do, his creatures, is to dwell together wherever they meet each other.
We're glad that you're here with us in support of workers.
I'm very, very honored to be here, and also honored to have been in the city council that created the Martin Luther King celebration for San Antonio and declared it a holiday, which is a significant action in times when budgets are difficult. It wasn't an easy decision, so it speaks well for the citizens of the city of San Antonio who asked us to do this and supported it. I'm here this morning to represent my district, District 1 in the city council, also to represent Hispanics in San Antonio. I think we need to be very cognizant of the fact that the struggle is not yet over, and that each of us that is here is a part of it, and that we just need to recommit ourselves to justice.
Thank you very much, Maria. We're honored that you, the city council, passed a resolution making this a memorial holiday here in the city of San Antonio.
I mean, I think San Antonio has benefited perhaps more than any other city in the country from the work that Dr. King did. When you just stop and think about how this city has changed under the Voting Rights Act, which Dr. King's work made possible, under the Civil Rights Laws, which Dr. King's work made possible, I could make the case that San Antonio and people of all color here have benefited as much as or more than any other city in the country. This is a model of what Dr. King sought to do.
Today celebrate this day. It is in San Antonio, Texas, that we have this saint, Rosa Parks.
While hearts grieve, souls remain firm and committed. For a dream cannot be dented by an assassin's bullet. Martin Luther King dared to dream. By daring, he crossed paths that others refused to tread. He opened doors that had been closed for generations. He brought dignity and hope to millions trapped by injustice.
All right, very powerful images there. young T.C. Calvert, Reverend Callis, Henry Cisneros, Maria Versoval. It was just a beautiful day. Now we got to go back. Now, by the way, my father, who was a labor leader, this was produced by his union. There was a very active, a very progressive labor union here, the IUE-AFL-CIO, that produced this video for future generations that we just heard from the beginning of this video. So here we are in 2022, but we're going to visit with TC to kind of set the tone here. It's 1983, right? King's birthday was finally approved as a federal holiday. Dr. Martin Luther King's birthday was not observed by every state until the year 2000. In fact, our very own state here in Texas did not pass the Dr. King holiday until 1991. That year, 1986, TC would galvanize the black and brown community to take action at a time when many in our city, our state, and our country was not embracing Dr. King like we see now. And what were the challenges?
Well, thank you. I want to thank the leadership team that put this symposium together and for having us here today. Listen, we don't really have enough time on this stage today to tell you how the black and brown community's been working together. Some of you in the audience remember the late state representative G.J. Sutton and George Ozuna. It goes way back before T.C. Calvert ever came onto the scene, where the black and brown community was working. For those out in Zoom land, you need to understand that the black and brown community has been working on civil rights issues for a very, very long time. We did have challenges. The only reason that Henry Cisneros and the city council embraced us, ladies and gentlemen, because they were scared of the fact that we were holding them accountable for things that they were doing at City Hall, such as not giving us street and drainage projects, racial discrimination within the police department, the fire department. So the city had a black eye. And they saw how the march was growing. I was marching with the march when it was only about 50 of us. And they saw the march get bigger and bigger every year. So they said, look, we don't want these guys marching on us. Brother, Sister Elaine and Yala, we don't want them marching on us, so we need to join them. We need to join forces with these guys. So you have to understand, politicians do things for a reason. They didn't do it because they like Dr. King. Y'all know that in this audience. Most of you civil rights people. Bruschetto, you know they didn't like that. They just embraced us because they said, we don't want these guys coming down on us. One of the things we heard from our intelligence, because we were going to start marching on City Hall, Ernest. Wow. Yeah, we were going to start marching down to City Hall. So that's when Henry and them said, well, you know, we better join forces with these guys. And so that's what happened. But we have a lot of challenges. Like I said, we don't have enough time today to talk about all the issues that I've worked with my brown brothers and sisters in this town. We came together on protesting the Ku Klux Klan. We came together on working for the IUE brothers. I worked very closely with Jaime when they were trying to get raises for the guys working in the Frederick building. Oh, I got so much I could tell you. We worked together on environmental justice. I've worked with Jolene Garcia and the Southwest Workers Union on a number of projects. The Levi Strauss issue. Oh, I could go on and on and on. Now, let me just tell you right now, bring it to current date, Norma. We're working with MALDF. We're working with LULAC. We're working with the NAACP right now. As I speak, we're getting ready for one of the most important elections with poll monitors, with setting up FBI hotlines, voter protection hotlines. So if you want to work on keep us working together, we got to make sure that we keep our democracy strong. Because democracy, y'all don't hear me, democracy's on the ballot.
And thank you for bringing up voting rights. We definitely carved out some time for that, TC. But the next question I have for you, you've been a strong voice, no question about it, a strong voice for Hispanic and black-owned businesses here in San Antonio. We've got the Jaime Rioses of the world and others, specifically in the area of fair contracting, something that's been a problem for a very long time here in our city. What do you see, TC, as the major issues, the roadblocks for the minority-owned business owners seeking economic justice.
Oh, y'all don't
Any community victories, share with us,
yeah,
TC.
yeah, I'm going to step on some toes here. So let me say, some of y'all have some friends over at the San Antonio water system. San Antonio SAWS discriminates against small minority women-owned businesses. Now, I know some of y'all know Mary Sarah Robles over there, but she's not doing a good job. Puente's not doing a good job. Yeah, I said it. They're not doing a good job. So we organized a fair contracting coalition, and we have made some people some multimillionaires in this town. Now, have I got any money out of it? No. Because what we have found out is we put out a report card. We're the only group in town. It's not the Hispanic Chamber. It's not the Black Chamber. It's not the North Side Chamber. It's the Fair Contracting Coalition that puts out a report card, and we give people grades on how they give small minority contracts to people. This group's been together 11 years. We have no funding from the city, no funding from the state, no funding from the county. We're all volunteers. And we've made some people very rich in this town. But we have a lot of minority businesses that are going out of business, especially after COVID, especially after what's been happening with the cost of inflation. So we could spend a whole hour, Ernest, talking about the Fair Contracting Coalition. Y'all gonna have to bring us back on that issue. That way you don't hear from T.C. Calvert, but you hear from J.P. Paving. You hear from Azteca Design. You hear from Jarvis Moore. You hear from those small minority businesses who are suffering right now. Because if we don't have business striving, that's our bread and butter for us to make sure we have a strong economy for our neighborhoods. So we got to address this issue. I don't have enough time today on this stage to tell you the horror stories. But we had some victories. We've had some victories. We've had help. Med Wheels, owned by a Hispanic woman, Jane Gonzalez. She's gotten some big contracts, and I could go down the list of people that got big contracts. Now, y'all know my son is the county commissioner. I had to give my son an F. My own son. The county got an F. Nelson Wolf got an F. Justin Rodriguez, some of y'all live in this district, gets an F. Y'all don't hear me talking. They get an F because they're not doing what they're supposed to do in helping small minority business. So they get an F. That's right.
Thank you, TC. TC's never been shy, right? Thank you, TC. We love you for that. We're going to switch gears a little bit, and we've seen elevated levels of crime in our community. Problem facing both black and brown communities. And East Side, West Side, South Side, North Side, all parts of town. Let me share some year-over-year statistics, TC, that will definitely raise a few eyebrows in the room, I'm sure. This is according to SAPD. Crimes against persons, up 4.7%. Crimes against property, up 15%. Crimes against society, 6.68%. TC, there's no question you have a strong history, a successful track record, mobilizing the community to fight back against crime in neighborhoods, namely in San Antonio Fighting Back. I know you were very involved with that. Share some examples of how you addressed the problem back then, and I know you were very active. And do you believe some of the strategies that you used then can work in today's environment?
Well, first of all, here's what a lot of people don't know. I worked with a group called National People's Action, very powerful group. That group, I was part of the Texas leadership team, working with groups from all over the country in about 50 states to put together the asset forfeiture law. If those of you don't know what that means, it means drug money. The money that the police, the sheriff, the district attorney, the DEA take from the drug dealers. We wrote that law, Sister Cantu, and we asked them to return part of that money back to neighborhoods for community organizing. Now, the San Antonio Police Officers Association and the police officer associations across this country, they control that money. And let me tell you, when Trump was the president and he wanted to build a wall, he said, I'm going to take the asset forfeiture money if y'all don't give me the money to build a wall. That's how much money is there. So we could solve this crime problem, but we want the police departments and the sheriff's departments and the district attorneys and the DEA to return that money back to our communities. They're using that money for slush funds, to travel, for police overtime, for bulletproof. They use that money for whatever they want to. The money is there, and it's in the millions and billions of dollars. You guys have to help me, Burchetto. Make sure they return that money back. I helped write the law with the Justice Department back in the 70s. But every year, Sister Yala, they water down that particular money to make sure that the groups and the communities don't get it. Everybody write that down. Put it in your head. Asset forfeiture. That I saw Norma gave y'all some homework, so that's my homework to you guys. You got to work on asset forfeiture. Tell Chief McManus you want that money back in the community. Tell Sheriff Salazar you want that money back in the community. Let me tell you what the criminals asked me. I asked criminals, what is the main thing you fear? Here, I'm getting ready to give y'all $1 million worth of information. Listen to me carefully. Criminals don't like an organized community. When they know your community's not organized, they're going to come in, they're going to sell drugs, they're going to do what they want to do. But if your community's organized, they say, Mr. Calvert, we know, they call me the cleaner. They say, we see you coming in, because I have a group of organizers, they wear these blue shirts, the Neighborhood First Alliance, and they see the blue shirts, they move out. And the best thing to do is you need to have house meetings. Here's $2 million worth of information. House meetings, not a big meeting at St. Timothy's Catholic Church, but house meetings with 3 or 4 people knowing your neighbor. That's how you win against the people that are selling drugs and doing stuff. Because a lot of them, you know, they're our relatives. We got relatives selling dope. We got relatives that are gangbangers. So we know who they are. So I've done this across the country, the asset forfeiture thing. A lot of people don't know it. I don't go around town beating my chest telling people that I helped write the asset forfeiture law. I worked with groups in Iowa, Chicago, Illinois, but we got to get that money returned back to our communities to fight crime. It's not city budget money. It's not taxpayer money. It's dope money. We need that money returned back to our communities. I could talk about the whole crime thing for a whole 4 hours. And I've been very successful in reducing crime in neighborhoods. But it's neighborhoods that we have organized. I've done it so good that we got a grant with the Department of Justice. And, hey, we be rocking and rolling. But they don't give us that much money because I want the asset forfeiture money. I don't want the city's money. I want the asset forfeiture money. And I get kind of pissed off thinking about it.
No, TC, you shared a story with me the other day. Yes.
I really do. I get mad. And I've told McManus to his face. Yeah. And I've told Salazar, y'all need to give that money back to the community. Quit wasting that damn money.
You shared a story with me some time back, and you were saying that there was a problem in the neighborhood. There was a convenience store that was really attracting drug dealing to prostitution.
Murders, everything.
And you were able to get that business, you know, share that story. I think it's important.
Well, right on the corner of New Braunfels and Hayes, this is a particular area where they had over 1,000 police calls. Oh, we went. Look, if the area has over 1,000 police calls, that's the kind of neighborhoods we like to go into. So this was the store on the corner of New Braunfels and Hayes. They had about 7 or 8 murders there, and so we mobilized the churches, the schools, the neighborhood groups, everybody, the businesses, and we shut it down. Yes, we shut them down. Now they got new owners there. But you got to organize the people. So we went before city council, and let me just say this to you. Sometimes from the mouths of babes, it don't always have to be from the old forts like T.C. Calvert. But I organized a group of kids from Tynan Elementary, Boughton Elementary, from that particular area, Wheatley, and we had them to write letters to the mayor, city council, to the alcohol, tobacco and firearm people, and everybody. So you got to get everybody involved. It can't be a T.C. Calvert production. My success and my son's success is because we work with a lot of people. It's not me. I'm trying to develop new leadership. So, yeah, we organized a lot of people. We had a big meeting, had 150 people showed up at the New Mount Pleasant Baptist Church. We had the mayor there, the council people there. Everybody was there. And we told them we wanted to shut down. And when we shut it down, guess what happened? Crime went down. No more murders. No more drive-bys. Everybody say, get organized.
Get organized.
Yeah. Don't act. Let me hear you say, don't agonize. Come on, audience.
Don't agonize.
Don't agonize. Come on, audience. There's people in Zoom land, they know it's somebody here. Don't agonize. Organize.
Organize. There you
That's
go.
your theme for the day. Don't agonize, organize. Let me hear you say it again. Don't agonize,
Organize. Beautiful, TC. We're going to move on to our last topic, and it's voting rights. And I want to share an experience I had in August. I'm not sure if you heard about this, but the United Farm Workers marched 335 miles from Delano, California to Sacramento to advocate for a bill, Assembly Bill 2183, that would deliver much needed protections for farm workers in the fields. Now you're wondering, farm workers, voting rights, where does this come in? They were simply trying to gain opportunity for the farm workers to be able to vote without any suppression and tactics that go on in the fields when there's union elections for the farm workers. So we've seen voting rights and suppression creep from the neighborhoods of our cities across the United States into the fields. So everyone's been impacted by that, TC. I want you to share, you're very involved right now as we head into November. Share with the audience what you're working on, and specifically, what do we see? We've seen ballots that have been in the percentages like 30% that were not even counted in the last election.
So when I leave the stage today, the first thing I'm going to be working on when I leave here is I'm going to be working on the very thing he talked about, voting rights, voter protection. San Antonio, Texas had thousands of people that did not receive their mail ballots. So yesterday, I was on KEDA radio with my Bexar County Voting Rights Coalition members talking about mail ballots. I even had Sister Gabriella Lohan from the Holy Spirit Sisters, because most of the Holy Spirit Sisters, most of them are teachers. They teach school. And they had 4 of their members had their mail ballots rejected because the state of Texas, some of y'all's good friend Greg Abbott and Dan Patrick and the Republican legislature, yeah, I said it. Somebody's got to say it. We have the most racist voter suppression law in the country. More racist than Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Texas. And we ought to be ashamed of ourselves, because some of y'all still are voting for people who are oppressing us. Texas has the worst voter suppression laws in the country. And Abbott and his people ought to be ashamed of themselves. It's a disgrace for our senior citizens to have their mail ballots rejected because they didn't have a driver's license, or didn't remember their social security number, or they didn't sign the paperwork right. So if there's anything I want the people out in Zoom land to know, help your grandmother, help your mothers fill out those mail ballots. Get them in. Make sure we're telling them, Norma, to put their driver's license and their social security number. Everybody say driver's license.
Driver's license.
And social security number.
And social security.
And guess what else they be doing? Your governor. I'm sick of Abbott. Let me tell you what he does. You got to put it in 2 envelopes. You got to put the ballot in the little white envelope. Then you got to put it in another envelope. So make sure you tell your people to make sure it's done in 2 envelopes. Sick of Abbott. I got to leave here today. I got to go meet with some people to deal with voter suppression, when I ought to be having a good time on a Saturday and relaxing. But I got to go deal with voter suppression.
Thank you, TC. Truth to power, no doubt. You know, there was a recent quote and I'm going to paraphrase. I don't remember the exact quote, but I'm going to paraphrase. The governor made a statement to something along the lines of, voter integrity is now law in Texas. Well, if you're measuring integrity by suppressing the state of Texas and eliminating, during COVID, when the state was trying to provide opportunities to vote, drive-through, expanding hours, if you call that integrity and you're cutting back, that's reminiscent to me, and I know it's going to be out there, but That's reminiscent of Jim Crow. That's reminiscent of Jim Crow laws. So that's where we're headed. And if those of you out there who are not motivated to go out and vote, both TC and I stand here, and all of us in this room, I'm sure, we've got to get those who don't vote, have never voted for ever in their life. This is the time, and we're seeing
democracy, brother, is on the ballot, and so we need to vote like we need to vote like it's the last thing happening in the world. So democracy's on the ballot, and so I challenge everyone here in the room and everybody out there in Zoom land to get everybody involved. Make voting a family affair. Just like we make Christmas a family affair, make voting a family affair. Like we make New Year's, like we do everything else, we got to make voting, turn it into a big party. Because let me tell you, they're not expecting you to show up. And we need to prove them wrong. They not think you're going to show up.
Well, I couldn't think of a more perfect stop. I mean, we could go on for hours with TC, right? What a wonderful person to learn from, hear from. Thank you, TC. And we definitely want to leave an opportunity. If there's any questions for TC, for us, we'd be more than happy to answer them if we're right on time here. So,
anyway, thank you guys. We left out a lot, but have us back, and we could talk about a lot of issues. We got tons of footage, of tons of photos. I got about 50 years worth of stuff that I can show you. I'm 70 years old. I got old bad football knees. That's why I had to come up the other way over here.
Well, thank you, Sarah. Thank you to MACRI for this opportunity. What a wonderful session we've had so far this morning, sessions we've had this morning, and look forward to hearing from the others this afternoon. Thank you.
God bless you, and go vote.
To TC Calvert and Ernest Martinez, thank you for being here with us this morning. I think we all know civic engagement takes a lot of energy, and I think we can all draw some energy from TC this morning, so thank you so much for your passion. We are going to take a little break while we get our next panel of guests up on the stage. Up next, we have movements for Mexican Americans on the ballot and at the polls. We'll be right back with our next panel. Thank you.
I just introduce myself, right? Yes, it's fine. What power. Man, I feel like I've been to church with T.C. Calvert. Híjole.
Interesting, right? So the guy who operates that camera right
Uh-huh.
there, he does this thing where he puts his hands up like this, and then when he goes like that,
That, okay, all right. Oh my God, there he is. Okay, you're ready. You can take a seat wherever you want. Let me give you a water. It doesn't matter where we sit because
Okay.
they're just going to be like this. And
Okay.
Fatima,
Sí, sí, I saw her.
so she's going to be on Zoom,
Yeah.
and so she'll need to leave a little early because
Okay.
she has a Zoom with the doctor.
Okay.
So,
All right.
but we'll
Okay, yeah,
we'll
yeah.
probably have too much.
Yeah.
So, and like I said, the Henry Kissinger thing. Doesn't
Right.
matter what I ask.
Yeah.
You can talk about what you want. Were you here for T.C. Calvert? Oh my God, it was so wonderful. Yes. You tell me when. Hello and welcome back. There's a lot of buzz in the audience because if you were here, you would see all the Chicano royalty in this audience, man. It is buzzing. T.C. Calvert just became our pastor and preacher, and there's an excitement in the air. My name is Elaine Ayala, and I'm the Metro columnist for the Express News, and I'm a native West Sider, so I'm very at home at the Guadalupe Theater. Our panel today is Movements for Mexican Americans on the Ballot and at the Polls. Our two panelists are Fatima Menendez. She's Interim Regional Counsel for the Mexican American Legal Defense and Educational Fund, Southwest Regional Office, and she is joining us via Zoom. Prior to this position, hi Fatima, she served as a legislative staff attorney. In that role, she testified before the Texas legislature on education, political access, voting rights, and immigrant rights on behalf of MALDEF to protect the civil rights of Latinos in Texas. Before joining MALDEF, she represented unaccompanied child immigrants as a staff attorney for Raíces, that is the Refugee and Immigrant Center for Education and Legal Services. She's a graduate of St. Mary's University Law School and St. Mary's. Our other panelists, the esteemed Rogelio Saenz. Dr. Saenz is a sociologist and demographer at the University of Texas at San Antonio. He's a professor in the Department of Demography, and he previously served as dean of the College of Public Policy. Dr. Saenz has written extensively in the areas of demography, Latinos, race, inequality, immigration, COVID-19, health disparities, aging, public policy, and social justice. And that's an incomplete list. He's co-author of the book Latinos in the United States, Diversity and Change, and is the co-editor of the International Handbook of Demography of Race and Ethnicity. Dr. Saenz has written essays and research briefs. He's prolific for a variety of news media outlets and academic outlets as well. He recently received the 2020 Saber es Poder Academic Excellence Award from the University of Arizona's Department of Mexican American Studies and the 2021 Cox Johnson Pfizer Award from the American Sociological Association. He has been inducted into the UTSA Academy of Distinguished Researchers. It's an honor to be here for MACRI's 2022 Symposium and to celebrate a National Public History Institute dedicated to preserving, collecting, and sharing Mexican American civil rights history. Mexican American history is American history and should be better known, told, and acknowledged. Our charge in this session is to examine and explore the topic of Mexican American movements on the ballot and at the polls, a critical topic as Texas voters head to the polls for early voting on Monday. Our panelists will discuss the legal and political efforts by and for Mexican Americans and the actions of candidates and voters themselves. I'll first ask our panelists for a few opening remarks about this topic before jumping into questions. Let's go to Fatima Menendez first.
Hello, can everybody hear me okay? Okay, perfect. I am so sorry I cannot be there with you today in person, but I am incredibly honored to be able to join you all via Zoom and to be a part of the symposium, MACRI Symposium. Thank you so much to Elaine for the kind introduction. Thank you to MACRI for the invitation to be able to speak with all of you, especially on such an incredibly important topic. Thank you to Professor Rogelio Saenz for also joining on this panel. I always learn so much anytime that I am around him and listening to him. And thank you to each of you for joining us today. I first want to give just a very quick description of MALDEF and the work that we are doing. MALDEF is the Mexican American Legal Defense and Educational Fund. We were founded in San Antonio, and we are now headquartered in Los Angeles, but we like to say that our heart is still in San Antonio. We work to protect the civil rights of Latinos through litigation and legislative and policy work, as well as through community education. We work in several program areas, including voting rights, education, employment, and immigrants' rights. We are incredibly honored to be here with all of you. I know that many of you, have been longtime supporters and allies of MALDEF, and the same vice versa with your organizations and the leadership that you all exemplify in the community. This conversation is incredibly important for quite a few reasons. Of course, we know that early voting begins next week. We have a very important election coming up. And it's important to remember that while Mexican Americans and Latinos have become a more significant proportion of the voter eligible population, we continue to face a strong narrative that often positions us outside of American identity or American citizenship. There is an assumption that people are not US citizens when they look Latino. And so this positioning is not unique to Latinos. It's happened historically to lots of groups that came to the United States as immigrants. It's a notion, though, that contributes to many obstacles that Mexican Americans and Latinos have faced in the past, and that we continue to face when it comes to access to voting. And for that reason and many other reasons, I know that this conversation is incredibly timely, it's important, and I am excited to have the conversation with all of you today. So thank you.
Thank you. Rogelio, opening remarks, please.
Okay. Good morning, buenos dias. And it's an honor to be here, and thank you, Sarah, for the invitation. And I'm honored also to be with Fatima and Elaine on this panel. I started working on the demography of the Latino population back in the 1980 census, and at that time, there were the population projections that were showing that the state was going to change tremendously with respect to the representation of Latinos. And it seemed like far, far away, but it happened just about a month ago. The Census Bureau reported that for the first time then Latinos became the largest group here in Texas. So that we've seen that change take over, and at the same time we've seen escalating policies that have been instituted to keep Latinos and African Americans and people of color from obtaining their right political power. So that we've seen voter ID, we've seen a variety of things over and over and over again. And this is, I think we're reaching the peak that we cannot take it any longer. We're talking about the reversal of Roe. We're talking about voter suppression that has been instituted in a very bald-faced way that has really hurt people of color, including Latinos. And to give you kind of an idea of those tactics that have been used, we saw that between 2010 and 2020, the Latino population accounted for about close to 2 million of the close to 4 million people that were added to the Texas population. Texas gained 2 congressional seats because of that. And about 95.3% of all the growth, those nearly 4 million people that were added to the Texas population were people of color, compared to about 4.7% that was due to the white population. And I've indicated that what that represents is that if you look at the city propers of San Antonio and Houston, those were the people of color that were added to the Texas population. In contrast with the white population, it was essentially the city of Brownsville. So that gives you an idea of the magnitude of difference in terms of the contribution of Latinos and other people of color to the state's population that were responsible really for bringing those 2 congressional seats. And it was projected that we would have gained 3, but Abbott and his cronies didn't add money to increase the count in Texas. And as what are the outcomes? The outcomes are that we see fewer Latino and African American congressional seats than we had in the previous session, in the previous period. So that even though 95% of the growth was due to people of color, we actually got punished by having fewer majority African American and fewer majority Latino districts around the state. So that, again, that in concert with the elimination of Roe, the voter suppression laws that have been established and so forth, will be a wake-up call for Latinos, because things cannot get much worse than they are. But of course, we're in Texas, and that's always the case, that they'll heighten it and make it even worse.
I'm reminded that Lydia Camarillo, who was on your sessions yesterday, told me, and in a column I wrote Friday, that white Texans make up a little over 39% of the population, next to the 40-ish that Latinos make, yet whites control and are the majority in 60% of the voting districts in Texas. That is what we're up against. I reminded both our speakers today that I don't mind that they follow the Henry Kissinger rule. And Henry Kissinger was known to come before the press and say, "Do you have any questions for my answers?" So I don't mind. I won't be offended if they don't like my question and prefer to answer another one. But I'll begin with Fatima. Let's talk about some of the movements as well as the legal obstacles put in front of Mexican Americans historically, and what are some of the laws and obstacles that have remained or been instituted more recently to suppress the Mexican American vote.
Thank you, Elaine, for the option to answer another question, but I think that is a wonderful question. You know, as I mentioned earlier, Mexican Americans and Latinos continue to face a strong narrative that positions us outside of American identity or American citizenship. This notion, you know, we used to have very egregious and just blatant examples of this type of discrimination and sentiment. In Weslaco in 1928, there was a barrio election box that was violently assailed upon by 3,000 to 4,000 Anglos at the polling place who shouted, "Don't let those Mexicans in to vote, throw them out." And there were men with shotguns, you know, who were there and protecting the crowd. And that deterred about 200 to 300 Mexican American voters. And they didn't show up at all to the election. And, you know, that continued through the Texas Democratic Party. We've seen this historically banned Mexican and Black voters from voting in the Democratic primaries until the early 1940s. You used to have to swear, "I am a white person and I am a Democrat," to be able to vote in the Democratic primaries in Texas. Texas was also one of the last 4 states that had a poll tax law in place. And it was until the late 1960s that federal courts declared these laws unconstitutional. Within the narrative that Mexican Americans and Latinos continue to face that positions us outside of the American identity or American citizenship is one that you know, continues to perpetuate the notion that we are committing voter fraud and that we are perpetrating fraud on the election system. So this narrative is, you know, continue to being pushed forward, and the narrative continues to go on to say that elections are being hijacked by non-U.S. citizen voters, even when there is little to no evidence of non-U.S. citizens registering to vote when they know they aren't eligible. So this type of narrative is important to focus on because it's what's often used to implement policies and practices that are discriminatory towards Mexican Americans and Latinos who are eligible to register to vote, And also it's used to justify laws that require naturalized US citizens to provide documentary proof of citizenship to register to vote. A recent example of this is from 2019. As recent as 2019, we saw a voter purge that was put in place by the Texas Secretary of State. At that time, it was the acting Secretary of State, David Whitley, who issued an advisory to county registrars throughout the state of Texas. And he warned that over 95,000 non-US citizens were registered to vote in the state of Texas, and that thousands had voted in previous elections. His office very quickly, the day after, recognized and realized internally that their method for coming to this conclusion was flawed. However, they did not provide any of that information to the county registrars. The advisory that they issued to the county registrar said, we are flagging these individuals for you. We are providing you actionable information that your office now needs to take care of. And those voters that were flagged by the Secretary of State's office, many of them received a letter from their county registrar's office saying that they had to provide additional documentary proof of their US citizenship within 30 days, or they would be purged from the voter rolls. And the individuals that ended up being flagged, many of them, by the Secretary of State's flawed methodology, were individuals who had at one point in time indicated non-US citizenship. But we know that in Texas, individuals who are legal permanent residents are able to apply for a driver's license. And many times, a legal permanent resident will then naturalize after they have received their driver's license, and then they register to vote. But the flawed methodology that was used by the Secretary of State's office was flagging just anybody who had ever indicated non-US citizenship, even if they had not done anything wrong at the Texas Department of Public Safety office. They had registered to vote after they became naturalized citizens. And so this flawed methodology really was targeting naturalized US citizens who were eligible to register to vote and who legally and rightfully so registered to vote. This is something that MALDEF brought suit on behalf of several affected voters who were flagged and received these purge letters. We were successful in reaching a decision and a settlement with the Secretary of State's office that going forward they will not use this flawed methodology. And we know that in Texas, over 50% of naturalized US citizen voters are Latinos. So this was something that was intentionally targeting that population. And so that's one recent example of methods and policies and practices that are being used even here in the state of Texas to discriminate and prevent Mexican American voters from either registering to vote or for remaining on the polls and actually having access to voting. In 2021, we saw an attempt at the Texas legislature, even after a settlement was reached through the litigation on the voter purge, that attempted to codify that flawed methodology and to make it law. And so this is something that MALDEF was very vigilant about at the Texas Capitol. We were successful in getting that language removed from any of the legislation that we saw it in. And we continue to monitor that situation and monitor any practices that the Secretary of State's office has put in place. Something that Dr. Sines mentioned is Texas voter ID. In 2011, Texas required or changed the law to require that photo ID be required to be able to vote. And so this is something that is, burdensome for the elderly, for people of color, for people who live in rural regions in Texas. Texas is a very large state. And there has been litigation over this, but a photo ID is still required to vote. We know that underlying documents that are required to obtain photo ID cost money. It's a significant expense for lower income Americans, and voters, or those who are registered to vote and need a photo ID to be able to show up to vote, are going to have to incur these costs. If they live in a rural area, then they have to travel to a Texas Department of Public Safety office, which can be very far. It costs money to be able to get the documents to be able to provide it at that office to get your photo ID. So all of these things together, maybe on their face, they don't seem like discriminatory practices or laws, but they really do deter people of color, Latinos, Mexican Americans, and other communities of color from being able to either register to vote or to access the vote, access their vote, and access the polling locations.
I'm reminded that Southwest Voter did a study of who was being deterred at the polls because of voter ID laws. And in addition to people of color, they found many elderly who were white and otherwise, and one of the groups that had the most trouble were white nuns, who don't, many of them don't drive, or especially the elder ones, and had trouble getting the documents to be able to vote. So it's a problem for many communities. Fatima, okay, so the other thing I just thought of is that, isn't it wonderful that we have Sarah Gould and Fatima Menendez as future leaders in our community? Aren't we lucky? Yes, let's applaud them. Rogelio. Barriers have also been put before Mexican American candidates. Talk about those, as well as how those candidates have managed to get on ballots and how they've made opportunities for themselves and Mexican Americans to make an impact. And I'd like for you to address another thing that's flawed in some of the demography ideas, and that is the issue of citizenry, and how many of those in the population growth are Mexican American births versus immigrant births. So work that into it.
I'll go with the Kissinger.
Okay, go with the Kissinger rule. That's okay.
No. You mentioned in terms of the difficulties in terms of people getting on the ballot and so forth, and
I imagine money is chief among them.
That's a major issue. But I think that the Democratic Party itself has taken for granted the Latino voters for so long, and I think we see that going on in South Texas, the extent to which there's been political kind of shifts there. Whether or not those are real and that will be enduring is another question. But it has been, I think, that the Democratic Party has taken for granted the African American vote, the Latino vote, and I think we also see the political candidates have traditionally been more white, except for areas where you have heavy concentrations of Latinos, ignoring the demographic shifts that are taking place in Texas. So that continues to be a major challenge, and you have the money, of course, is another big issue, that you have people in the Republican Party, as well as those in the Democratic Party that are white, that tend to have much greater, deeper pockets. We see with Abbott the millions and millions and millions of dollars that he has stockpiled away. So those are the major challenges.
I would imagine that redistricting and just getting on a ballot where voters can elect a candidate of their choice is also a major issue.
Yeah, that has been limited, as I pointed out, the extent to which there was a tremendous growth due to the Latino population and African American and Asian population, but the reduction in the number of majority Latino and African American seats plays another major role in terms of the candidates and so forth, and who are the people that are put there. And we see in the Dallas region, for example, the extent to which they gerrymandered and put a lot of white votes voters from rural areas, despite the fact that something like 200 counties in Texas had fewer whites in 2020 than they had in 2010. So those continue to be the challenges. You mentioned the citizenry. We've seen in Texas, for example, traditionally it's been about 30% of the population has been born outside of the United States. That varies tremendously. Here in San Antonio, it's probably more like 16, 17%, because here in San Antonio we have people who have been here for generations and generations and generations, and the immigrant population is not as large of a share of the Latino population here in San Antonio as you find in Houston, in Dallas, in those areas in particular. But that continues to be, I think, a major issue. The anti-immigrant sentiments that we've seen, the treatment of immigrants that are coming to try to get the refugee status and so forth, the way they've been inhumanely treated and so forth, that continues to be a case. I think with respect to naturalized citizens that are eligible to vote, I think that there is a significant portion of the population that turns out to vote compared to the native-born population.
So the struggles and challenges continue. Fatima, we heard T.C. Calvert, and we've heard this so many times in shows and in political discourse that this time democracy is on the ballot. But I'd love for you to talk about the civil rights issues that will be at stake given what happens in the November elections. We're asking you to kind of look ahead at what the Texas legislature might do, what will happen in the Supreme Court, what you think is relevant to the Latino vote especially.
Thank you, Elaine, for that question. I think that's a wonderful question, and there are so many things that are on the line, but I definitely have 2 or 3 that I want to highlight for all of you and just to bring to your awareness. So as we all know, on November 8th, all U.S. representatives, state senators, state representatives, and members of the State Board of Education are up for election in Texas. Also on the ballot will be the governor, the lieutenant governor, and the attorney general. And oftentimes we don't think of, the attorney general as somebody who is playing as large of a role as he is in Texas when it comes to legislation that is passing, or when it comes to legislation that has passed that is good for the Latino community, is positive legislation, that it is responsive to Latino needs. But he really hasn't. So there are some things that I want to highlight for all of you. The first one that I think has really been at the forefront lately, because we, for a very long time, and lately because we just received a court ruling on it, is DACA. MALDEF continues to work on DACA. DACA was implemented in 2012, as we all know, and it allows for eligible young immigrants to receive protection from deportation and a work permit so that they are able to legally work in the United States. However, this program was targeted by the Texas Attorney General in 2018, and Texas, along with other states, sued the federal government to end the program. That is why we continue to litigate this. So really, I want to emphasize again that sometimes we don't think of a certain elected official maybe as having as much of an effect on issues that are important to us, but they really do. And so realizing that connection and the impact, potential impact, is important as we continue to show up to vote and look over the ballots. So MALDEF intervened on behalf of several DACA recipients, and we continue to represent the interest of DACA recipients in the DACA litigation. We have secured court rulings from a federal district court and recently the Fifth Circuit that keeps DACA in place for current DACA recipients. As I mentioned, the litigation continues, and of course there is no prediction that we are going to make about what will happen in the litigation. But with that being said, in order to ensure that DACA recipients and those similarly situated continue to receive protection from deportation and are able to legally work, Congress must act. So those that we elect to office have the power to do or not do something to create long-term positive change for DACA recipients and other immigrants. Another issue, since you mentioned specifically the Texas legislature, is one that we commonly see. It may even be that every Texas legislative session since 2001, when it was enacted, there has been an effort to repeal what's commonly referred to as the Texas Dream Act, House Bill 1403. This legislation, this law extends in-state tuition and grant eligibility to non-citizen residents of the state. We know that in-state tuition rates are often significantly lower than the rates that out-of-state students pay. And so the legislation includes both students who are documented, such as those that are visa holders, and students who are undocumented, including DACA recipients. So a student that is not a US citizen or a permanent resident is still considered a resident of Texas for higher education purposes if they can demonstrate they meet certain criteria under this law. So like I said, legislation to repeal the Texas Dream Act is filed nearly every Texas legislative session. The Texas legislature goes back into session beginning in January 2023. In about 3 weeks, the bill filing opens up, so we'll start to see what is going to be coming down the pipeline during the next Texas legislative session. But it's important to remember that our state senators, our state House representatives, along with their leadership, such as the lieutenant governor, are the elected officials who ultimately decide the fate or will decide the fate of the Texas Dream Act and other similar legislation that is responsive, and how much they are in charge of and have the power to either prioritize, craft, and pass legislation that is responsive to the Latino community and to people of color, or to instead prioritize, craft, and pass legislation that is harmful and that is not responsive to us, but that continues to be restrictive. There's one more thing that I really want to mention, because I know that this garnered a lot of attention earlier this year when our governor, who is also on the ballot, or will be, made a comment about landmark litigation that was actually a MALDEF case that was successful before the Supreme Court in the 1980s, the case being Plyler versus Doe. So this is a case that, the Supreme Court decided that all children, regardless of immigration status, have a constitutional right to a free public education from kindergarten to 12th grade. And like I mentioned, Governor Abbott said earlier this year that states need to be able to enforce their own immigration policies, or the federal government should cover the cost of educating undocumented children in public schools. We know that immigration law is an area of law that is strictly, relegated to the federal government. And, Abbott went on to say, Texas already long ago sued the federal government about having to incur the cost of the education program in a case called Plyler versus Doe. The Supreme Court ruled against us on the issue. I think I will resurrect that case and challenge the issue again. First, I want to say that Governor Abbott is wrong. It was a case that was brought against Texas, not by Texas, as he stated. And it was a case that was filed by MALDEF on behalf of students that were threatened by a Texas law that would have allowed schools to exclude them from public schools. It's a very well-established law, and we won't know if Texas will file a lawsuit challenging Plyler versus Doe until the Texas Attorney General does that, if he does do that. And so it's just something that I want to highlight again. All of these elected officials or positions that are on the ballot are incredibly important. on a federal level, on a state level, and they will continue to impact policies that are incredibly important to us. And so, it's important to pay attention to each office that is on the ballot. And so I just wanted to highlight that for all of you, and those are just a few of the civil rights issues that will be at stake.
I have to tell you that in the audience are lots of nodding heads, and I have to acknowledge some of them because they really are Chicano royalty. Along with Dr. Yolanda Santos is Dr. David Montejano, who's back home, thank goodness, Olga Kaufman, Al Kaufman, and Marta Tijerina. Man, we are so lucky in San Antonio that we are not only the Mexican-American cultural capital of the United States, I think we're the political capital of the United States. Rogelio, what impact might Mexican-American voters have at the polls this cycle in comparison to the last cycle? And also comment about so much fuss made of a Republican stronghold among Latinos in South Texas.
Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, in terms of we've seen the demographic shifts and so forth, so that each election we have a greater share of Texas voters who are Latino, and that is the case right now in terms of, according to Lidia Camarillo, 2.9 million Latinos are projected to turn out to vote, and we've seen a tremendous growth also in people who are registering to vote since 2018. If we look at 2016 to now, the great portion of the voter increase has been since 2018. So
and why do you think that is? What issues have motivated them to get registered?
I think that there's so many here in Texas. There's so many. Obviously, the voter suppression is a major issue. That it's so stark in terms of how it's structured against Latinos and African Americans, other people of color, as well as the poor in general. I think that more recently, as we've seen the overturning of Roe, that has also been a major motivator of people to turn out to vote. And even people who may consider themselves anti-abortion, for example, I think that they've seen this very draconian kind of shift against women who have been
against
raped.
Girls.
Yeah, girls and so forth. And we see, I think, in the state of Kansas, illustrates that, where it's a very conservative state, but yet there was a vote on the providing abortion services and so forth, and it won. So that, I think, is an indicator, a barometer of the degree to which that particular issue is going to be a major issue that is going to bring people out into the voting booth. We also have seen, I think, with the Latino population in particular, that we're a very youthful population. So a lot of the people that are eligible to register and so forth, a great portion come from the Latino population. And we see, I think, that the young in our community really represent the future of our population, but particularly right now. And for long it has been seen, political scientists have shown that younger voters are less likely to turn out to vote. But we see the people who are the activists right now in terms of the youth that are really at the forefront and are really organizing and so forth, and have played a very key role in organizing and getting people to register to vote. And right now, with the Latino population, 17% are 18 to 24 years of age, compared to 9% of the white population. And overall, the population less than 35 in the Latino community, we're about 38% versus 24% for white. So that really plays a major role. And I think that if we were able to get that youthful vote out, I think that the impact that the Latino population is going to make on the Texas 2022 election is going to be tremendous. Incidentally, even though we have that very youthful population, and schools, public schools, are required twice a year to provide the opportunity for kids who turn 18 years of age to register to vote. In reality, very few do. The Texas Civil Rights Project back in 2015, 2016 estimated that about 6% of public schools actually were providing that opportunity. And it is the case that with the Latino population, 204,000 kids turn age 18 every year. So the tremendous power, and we know that Texas has always tried to suppress that vote.
Absolutely.
And you don't see any kind of action to make sure that public schools
Yeah.
provide that opportunity.
Lots of states are very pro-voter.
Yeah.
They want to get people out to vote. Texas is not one of them. I wanted both of you to address the impact of what happened in Uvalde and the fact that Uvalde parents have been so vocal about gun issues and how that might impact the election too. Go ahead, Rogelio, and then Fatima, please.
Yeah,
respond.
yeah. The Uvalde tragedy. I mean, it's such a tragic situation. But one thing that has come out of that, I think, has been the organizing of the community. For long, it had been a community that had been at the forefront in terms of walkouts. For example, in the late 1960s, the work of Alfredo Santos as a youth and his continued support for his community there. But it also has galvanized the Latino population along, just like in many South Texas communities, marginalized populations that have been shoved aside despite their large presence in the community. And I think that the murder of these precious children, along with the two teachers, really has woken up the community. And you see the extent to which people are pressing for change, criticizing Abbott. That's how come in South Texas he didn't want the audience or anything like that because he was going to get criticized. But it has also stimulated people in the community that are running for political offices and so forth. So hopefully that is also going to be another thing that may catch fire in other parts of the state, including South Texas. And you had mentioned that earlier, and I forgot to address it, or I hadn't gotten there yet. But it has been then the challenge there. We need to remind ourselves, however, that in South Texas, it's about maybe 25% of the state's Latino population. And we know that the large majority, are in San Antonio, Houston, Dallas, and Austin and Fort Worth, that tend to be much more Democratic leaning and so forth. And it is going to be then what's going to happen. And again, that the criticism that I have and many others against the Democratic Party is that they've taken the Latino vote for granted. And I think illustration 101 is in the South Texas, in the Valley, where for a long time the Democrats were going to win, and hardly any money. Michelle Vallejo, who is running for Congressional District 15, has also been very vocal, the extent to which Democrats haven't been putting resources in her election, as well as others taking place in South Texas.
We're running out of time, but Fatima, please wrap us up and address the Uvalde component effect on the election, as well as whatever remarks you'd like to make.
Thank you so much. I definitely want to echo the sentiment and the message of Dr. Sines. I agree with what he said about really this being like a movement that is galvanized. And I think, we have just these very just clear, terrible incidents that, where Latinos are being murdered. And we see that the state's leadership is not nearly as responsive as it has been to other incidents that include communities that are Anglo, and that include other populations and not those of communities of color. We saw that shortly after the murder in the El Paso Walmart. And we saw, after some time, and because there was a very large push from the incredible delegation from El Paso and caucuses like the Mexican American Legislative Caucus and the Senate Hispanic Caucus at the Texas Capitol, really pushing for state leadership to respond, that there was a creation of a committee that would then focus on gun safety. And, then we see, unfortunately, that, you can continue to push for all of that change, but then you really have to focus on, well, who's being placed on those committees? And what is this committee really capable of doing? And then we have Uvalde happen, this tragic, terrible, just murder, like Dr. Sainz said, of, school children and teachers in these communities that often are not at the forefront of policymakers' minds when they are working to represent us and our communities. And so I think it really is a reminder of, who the communities consist of, what the needs of these communities are, and making sure that we continue to be valued, not just in the aftermath and immediate aftermath of these awful incidents, but that when we go back into the legislative session, we continue to really put pressure on our elected officials to come up with responsive policies that protect us and that empower the Latino community. And so I really do echo the sentiment of Dr. Sainz, and I really hope that we, will continue to gain momentum to galvanize and to continue to advocate for ourselves and really demand that these policies are reflective of what we need.
Thank you so much. We're at our time, and as you can see and hear, the movement toward civil rights and human rights continues, and it is a continual struggle. Thank you for joining us, and congratulations to MACRI on its 3rd anniversary. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, Elaine. No wonder she's the former president of the Association of Hispanic Journalists. She just really, you did a wonderful job. Thank you. And thank you to our panelists, Dr. Rogelio Sáenz and Fatima Menendez. Thank you for joining us, Fatima. I hope you feel better. Up next is our lunch break. We are going to break for lunch, catered today by 10 Times the Flavor Catering Company. So for those of you in person, we'll be serving lunch out in the lobby. And for those of you joining us virtually, we will be back at 1:30 Central. Thank you so much.